Deputy Speaker, many Australians are struggling right now. Inflation has degraded wages, and for many it can feel like they're just barely keeping their head above water. And in my electorate of Wentworth, where nearly 50% of constituents rent, I know that this year has seen budgets stretched and patience thin. But while I do know all Australians are doing it tough, the burden of cost of living is not shared equally. Those on the lowest incomes and on income support feel the greatest pain and insecurity when prices are rising. Across Australia, an astonishing 10%, or 3 million people, are currently experiencing poverty, and this number is only likely to grow as we see inflation moderating but remaining high. The price of food and non-alcoholic beverages have increased by 12% in 2 years. Rents are growing at twice as fast as wages, with only 1 in 100 rentals now considered affordable for households in the lowest 20% of the income distribution. And more than 175,000 households are on the waiting list for social housing. This bill is an important budgetary measure that will go some way to supporting Australians in the most vulnerable financial situation. This bill increases the Commonwealth rent assistance by another 10% on top of last year's increase of 15%. It extends the higher rate of JobSeeker to individual recipients with a very limited capacity to work between 0 and 14 hours, and increases the flexibility of carer payments to a person's temporary changes in circumstances. I appreciate these changes and the differences and acknowledge the difference that they will make to the lives of many people in this country. But however, even with this bill, the rate of supports don't go far enough. With a shortage of social housing and a long wait list, the private rental market is where people go to find homes. But with vacancies rates around 1%, this is becoming harder and more expensive to do. In 2020, the Grattan Institute indicated that the Commonwealth Rent Assistance needed to rise by around 40% to keep up with market rents. Even with consecutive increases in the CRA, the cumulative growth still is not keeping up with what is needed. The expansion of JobSeeker supports to those with very limited capacity to work does rectify an oversight in previous legislation, but it does little to address the adequacy of JobSeeker payments more generally. Earlier this year, the Economic Inclusion Advisory Committee found that the current rates of JobSeeker are all below the poverty lines used in Australia. Depending on the measure, the current JobSeeker payment sits somewhere between 57% and 72% of the poverty line. That means people are living in poverty. In the pre-budget submission, the Advisory Committee recommended that the rate of JobSeeker should be increased to 90% of the age pension, which would have increased at a rate by roughly $17 a day. This recommendation was not actioned on. So this bill, in conclusion, moves the needle in the right direction, and I commend the government for listening to the advice of experts and delivering the help where it is most needed. I acknowledge the truth of the Treasurer's words that he cannot provide money or funds for all the worthy projects that he and others across this parliament are approached on. However, I do think in this budget we should have seen a greater support for those who most needed, particularly in terms of the rate of JobSeeker, and that we should have considered other areas of spending restraints to enable that to happen, including, for example, holding back some of the current infrastructure spending, which could have allowed some of that spending to be available, or looked at things like fuel tax credits, which could have also freed up some money for the budget in this case. Thank you.